Hello, everyone. I'm Heather Edmonds, Program Associate with the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center. I'd like to welcome you to our office hours session on volunteer driver programs, recruitment, and retention. Before we get started, I will go through a few housekeeping items for today. Thank you. So all participants are muted. Please stay muted unless you are speaking. The session is being recorded and will be sent via email along with the slides. We do have closed captioning available, and that feature is go down to the bottom of your screen, click the CC button and click show subtitles, and you'll have that option available to you. And if possible, during our group discussion, please keep your cameras on to add to the interactive nature of this meeting. And also, we encourage you to provide your experience through our chat or by raising your hand or unmuting yourself. And again, our agenda, I'll go quickly over NADTC, our overview, and then we'll have our presenter, Virginia Salem, Administrator for the Northern Essex Elder Transport, and then we'll dive into our group discussion. And as a background, NADTC is a partnership between the National Association of Area Agencies on Aging and Easter Seals. And our mission is to promote the availability of accessible transportation options that serve the needs of older adults, people with disabilities, caregivers, and communities. And you see here we have several objectives, and I just want to highlight our objective, our person-centered technical assistance and information, which we offer information assistance and connection to local resources and a wide variety of transportation-related issues to professionals in the field. And our office hours is just one way we provide technical assistance. It's an opportunity for professionals in the field to engage with their peers, engage with NADTC staff, engage with our speaker, and also to share your valuable information, hopefully on this call today. And now I'd like to introduce Virginia Salem of the Northern Essex Elder Transport. And Virginia, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so very much, Heather. I really appreciate this opportunity to share what I've learned about recruiting and retention of volunteer drivers over the last 4.5 years. Just so that you can understand where I'm coming from, the first couple of slides are just to explain the NEAT organization. So next slide, Heather. So Northern Essex Elder Transport, we're actually celebrating our 40th year. We're a curb-to-curb volunteer driving program. And as you can see, we have 14 communities. There's some statistics down at the bottom, but I won't read them except for the fact that annually we typically help about 350 seniors with their transportation needs. Next slide. It's a unique and an innovative program where the Council on Aging sign a memorandum of understanding. So there's 14 municipalities, and NEAT, the nonprofit organization, we're a 501c3. And we all work together with the clients, the volunteers, and then interacting between the COA and the NEAT. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the senior center, they sign that memorandum of understanding, and they essentially take care of the ride request and the dispatching to the volunteer. So a senior calls the senior center, talks to the appropriate person. That person then reaches out to the volunteer drivers. And NEAT manages the rest of the administration of this program. So I am totally dedicated to the hours just to deal with transportation. NEAT handles the volunteers, the recruitment and the retention. We're going to talk about that. The administration, we do provide mileage reimbursement, supplemental liability. We handle the fundraising, and we also handle the outreach to both the clients and the community to make awareness of our service and recruit volunteers. Next slide. So prior to COVID, we used to have an annual appreciation for our volunteers. And in 2019, we had 115 volunteers to celebrate over 3,000 rides. We currently, because when COVID hit, we were suspended for 6 months. We reopened in 2020, And out of the 115 drivers that we had pre-COVID, 20 felt comfortable returning. We have recruited 26 new volunteers so far this year. After the vaccinations were made available, 28 of the original 115 have returned. There are still 17 inactive because they don't wish to follow the COVID guidelines that we're requiring for our volunteer drivers. On average, we get about 24 new volunteers each year. Most of them are female. Most of them are between the age of 55 and 80. We do have a few that are over 80, and we do have we have 2 that are in their mid-30s. If I can get a volunteer, because I have 40 years of experience of data here, if we can keep a volunteer for a little bit over a year, then there's a 73% chance that they're going to volunteer for the first 5 to 10 years. So the first year that you get a volunteer is really important in how to keep that person. You will lose, there will be attrition the first year, and it usually happens about the first 3 months and then up towards the end of the year. So we does have the objective to recruit 2 people every month. That's my objective. I don't always make it, but you have to have it to get there. Next slide, please. So I do have this theory that's called DEC, next slide, which is discover about our volunteers, educate the community and our volunteers, continue to communicate that information, and to keep the volunteers that we have. And it's very important that we realize that people don't, next slide, please. Yeah. People don't wake up and say, golly, today I'm going to become a volunteer driver. When they're 5 years old, they're not thinking about what I'm going to be to when I grow up. So it's very important that we realize that becoming a volunteer driver is not an impulsive decision. It's something that they need to think about, and we need to make sure that we're in front of them and they're aware of our program by very many multiple means. Next slide. So how do you find out where your volunteers come from? You obviously talk to your current volunteers. We use the traditional methods, which we're going to go over some of those slides, announcements, newsletters, articles. I've written articles for newspapers, cable, radio, but I'm always trying to change the message. It's very interesting to me. One of the things when talking to our volunteers, I found out that several people who have COPD found that volunteering for being a volunteer driver was a really good volunteer activity for them because it didn't require them to do a lot of walking. Of course, all of those are not volunteering now at this particular time because of COVID and people suffering from COPD. But that was one of the very interesting things that happens when you start talking to people and figure out, do they also golf? Do they, one thing that you will find is your volunteers, 9 out of 10 times, they're volunteering someplace else. And so where else are they volunteering, and how can you work with that other organization to share or recruit volunteers? And I reach out to those other organizations like food pantries that have the same client base that needs our services, and to work with those volunteers. I know sometimes people say, well, you can't keep asking people to volunteer, which I'm going to talk about asking to volunteer in a few minutes. But, there is that saying that if you want something done, you ask the busiest person you know. So chances are your volunteer drivers are doing something else, and that might help you. Next slide. So we're going to go over the next slides really kind of fast. And so these are the same different messages. Next slide. This slide we use at post offices, at coffee shops. I made a special slide dealing with the psychology of volunteering. If you do use this format to post things, it's real important that you rip one of them off. I know it sounds really silly, but there are a lot of people who don't want to mess up your flyer. So it's very helpful, and I tracked it as to which ones are giving you more responses, so it's important to rip it off. Next slide. Here again are just the different, we use in the newsletter, initially on the COA newsletters, and we change it every month. We change it up. Next slide. I try all different types of things with cable. Most cable stations will, anything to do with transportation, we are a volunteer driving program. We don't charge for our service, so we are definitely a public service. So most cable stations will allow you to record a commercial. Because the organization consists of myself, I work 30 hours a week, and I have a part-time program coordinator for 10. So we have a total of 40 hours. So how do we maximize what we do? So if I do a public service announcement on cable, I put it on my website, I make a Facebook posting, I put it in my newsletters to my volunteers as often as you can. So most cable stations will allow you to make a public service announcement. They'll also have various shows that you can go and talk to. If this sounds like something that you're not ready to do, you're not ready to stand in front of a camera, I guarantee you that someone in your organization or one of your volunteers would be willing to do that. And the radio is a great way. Every 6 weeks, I'm on the radio, and I go on the radio and I talk about transportation issues. And I'm very grateful for this organization that we're here today, because it is the information that I've learned from this and other programs that I talk about. I don't just talk about a volunteer driving program. I advocate for senior transportation, letting people know what it really means. It's not just somebody picks you up and takes you a ride. What is the issues that are facing seniors? Next slide. I use Facebook as well as another traditional thing. And again, once I've done it in a newsletter, I make it a Facebook post. So it's always the same message, but a little different, or a little different image to get people to see something different and repetitive. Next slide. We also do online recruiting. I do get volunteers from Volunteer Match. I also get some crazy stuff like people from California who want to volunteer to drive in Massachusetts, but it is worthwhile. There's a no charge version. You have to renew. You want to make sure your announcement is renewed, because every time you renew the announcement, that's when you get new volunteers. So you don't want to say, oh, I'm going to do this for 6 months and just do it twice a year. You need to do it like every 2 or 3 months to get on the top of their list. We're also listed on AARP, and of course we have the call for volunteers on our website. Next slide, please. So those were the traditional methods: magazines, cable, newsletters. So now we're going to go over a couple of the other methods that I've used to create awareness, to get people to realize that seniors need help and to ask for volunteers. Next slide. So these are my Halloween costumes before COVID, because we do work so closely with the senior centers, the Council on Aging. They always have a Halloween party, so I was pretty busy for Halloween and Christmas. These are my Halloween costumes. I started out with the blue cardboard box, and then the next year I went to my sporty little red car. And then the last one before COVID, I went to Oriental Trading and bought a toddler cardboard car, and I was just lucky enough to be able to go in it sideways. It's about $15 for that cardboard box. It makes an awesome costume. In addition, it makes a very attractive display if you're presenting your information. And also you can take it apart if you want. You can have 2 great bulletin boards that are very inexpensive. Next slide. Now, how did I get one of my best drivers? We are in Essex County, Massachusetts, which essentially we're at the top, pretty much close to New Hampshire. 4 of our communities actually touch New Hampshire. So how do I get drivers to drive to Boston? It's a 45 miles away to Boston. And I find that I use the Chamber of Commerce. We have about 4 in the different communities. And I was really surprised at all the benefits I got from working with the Chamber of Commerce. One, the Chamber of Commerce has a lot of small businesses, a lot of real estate agents, a lot of insurance, a lot of consultants. And I found that those consultants and real estate insurance agents, they do have some flexibility, and they are willing to drive that 1 or 2 trips to Boston and work around their schedule. So it was very interesting to find these smaller business people who want to give back to the community, but don't have a lot of time, but they could give time to take 1 or 2 rides a month. The other thing that the Chamber of Commerce and other organizations provide you with is their marketing arm. This particular case was the Scarecrow Contest. It required, you know, the Chamber of Commerce every day was sending out emails, doing Facebook posts, asking people to go around the town and vote on the costume. Now, I didn't win. I know, it's disappointing, but I didn't win the costume, but I had all those people that went and looked at the costume, and I got all of that exposure, and all I had to do was build the Scarecrow. And people were walking and looking at the Scarecrow for 3 weeks before. Next slide, please. So again, I'm always trying to get different ways to share, get the message across. To stick with the Chamber of Commerce, I always go and make presentations at the Rotary, the Kiwanis, anywhere that they will allow me to talk. And that's where I've taken a lot of the information that I have learned through this organization and others to talk about that 1 out of 5 people over the age of 65 no longer drive. Talk about the fact that, you know, as a woman, the chances are the last 10 years of my life, I'm not going to be driving, so that I can really make people be educated on the transportation, and then talk about what NEAT does, and then talk about recruitment of volunteers. I like the gift of a lift saying. I like it because if you look on the left, that's only a cardboard box with some white paper on it. So as a nonprofit organization with a very limited budget, it allows me to take something really large and put it somewhere, and then I could throw it away. I don't have to have that big white piece of cardboard or poster board or something that was a big investment hanging in my office all the other time. You can do very simple things. The bottom is actually a return address label, where you get 30 of them on a sheet, and you buy the little bag of candy canes and you put them out for Christmas. So always trying to be innovative, trying to get that message across. Next slide, please. There's only myself, as I said, and my program coordinator. So how do I do this all the time? Well, I can't remember to do everything. I can't remember how you, I'm trying to do everything else you have to do to run an organization. How to remember to always recruit. So I like to be a walking billboard. So I have t-shirts, I wear them to the gym, so that other people who are exercising can I stand up in the front of the class, so everybody in the back has to look at my t-shirt. I love my messenger bag. It's always on my hip. The grocery shop bags, we actually purchased them as far as keeping and retaining our drivers, trying to say thank you to the drivers. But it also has that whole outreach. The drivers taking that bag, they're at the grocery store, they're putting it on the conveyor belt. The people before and after see them. So the grocery bags are a good way. I have the volunteer buttons that I give to my volunteers, the ones who are willing to wear them to help promote the system. I have my name tag. I find that it's really helpful that you have your name tag when you're talking to people. It helps them to remember you. It helps them to remember, oh yeah, that Ginny in transportation, how do I get back to her? So it's a good investment to have a magnetic. I have the magnetic ones, but you can also just use the pin ones too. Next slide, please. Okay, if you go away with anything else about recruitment, this is it. And this is, you have to call any new inquiries back that day. If you get an email on Wednesday that somebody wants to be a volunteer, you have to call them back on Wednesday. It is the most important thing to establish a good relationship at the very beginning. And it's the hardest thing to do because you've already planned your day to do something else. You weren't planning on somebody new to call and ask about volunteering. And so you have to reorganize, but it is the most important thing is that you call your volunteers back within 24 hours, hopefully that day, but within 24 hours. Next slide. And this is the other, I have found to get volunteers, I really need to make it very personal. I have to make them think about what it would be like to be a senior without transportation. The last 16 months have given us that opportunity. We all know what isolation has felt like. But I remind them when I'm talking to them now, I say, well, thank goodness we were able to get in the car and drive around the block. Didn't you do that? And every person I know who had the ability to drive at one time or another in the last 16 months just got in the car just to get out of the house. So it really makes them really think about what would that be if that's that person's entire life. Prior to COVID, I used to talk about having your car at the repair shop and, finding out that the mechanic has to keep it for a day and, oh my gosh, what are you going to do? How are you going to get to work? And then say to them now, okay, now how would it be if everything you needed to do every day? So I really try to get them to feel it. I say ask for a referral, but that's because I never ask somebody to be a volunteer driver directly. I ask them if they know anybody who might be interested in being a volunteer driver. Do you know anybody who just retired who might be driving their spouse crazy, who might be interested in volunteering? I don't ask the person if they want to volunteer because then their brain is thinking about, oh, I can't volunteer, I don't know what it means. So it gives me an opportunity to ask them that question. And then the next step is I provide details. And that's the one thing that I see a lot of organizations advertise for volunteer drivers, but they don't provide enough details as to what does it mean to be a volunteer driver. Now, we can all say, well, all they have to do is call me and I'll tell them. It takes a lot for many people to pick up the phone and ask questions that they don't really know. So I try to always provide the information. The average ride for our organization is 27 miles, takes 2 hours, and the average driver drives 3 times a month. You decide when and where you want to drive. And that eases and answers a lot of their questions so that then they can proceed and hopefully become a volunteer. when I do have an opportunity to talk to someone, I always, even if they say they don't want to be a volunteer, I always want to try to give them something. And I have these lovely program cards, which my pictures don't show, but they're the size of a business card. Talks about the organization, tells you how to schedule a ride, and then on the back part, it recruits volunteers. So I always try to give that person something here in case you meet someone who needs help with transportation. Here's a card. Or if you know somebody who's volunteering, here's a card. The business size card works really well because people can put it in their wallet, they can put it in their pocketbook, and it stays nice versus the trifold brochures that get all messed up being in your pocketbook. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about communications is really important. We have volunteer drivers. They're picking up Millie and bringing them back. They don't really know what's going on in the organization. So we do provide mileage reimbursement, 45 cents a mile, and we send them the reimbursement checks monthly. And with that monthly reimbursement check, I have an announcement. It's a half of a 8.5 by 11 sheet. And it talks about how many rides we did, what new volunteers, did we get it, if we had special funding, if I was on cable. Next month, I will talk about how I was on this show. And I also try to put things in them. Of course, it's hard because we're trying to stay within the 1 ounce, 55 cent stamp, but you can be creative. At Valentine's Day, you go to the dollar store, you buy the little Valentine's cards that we used to get when we were in kindergarten. And I put one in there. The shamrocks on the side, the picture again doesn't do it justice, but those are little paper seeds. And you wet them and you put them in a little cup and they sprout. So it's just a little different to tell our volunteers that we really appreciate them and we're thinking about them. Next slide, please. As I said, it's real important that you monitor their activity, especially your new people. So our new volunteer drivers, I always acknowledge their first ride. I have these cards, they have this little wooden stick with the fancy glitter there, and I always, hats off to you, and send them this card thanking them for their first ride. Next slide, please. We also want to show the drivers how much we care, and that they are real important to us, and they are the heart of the organization. So we did provide these volunteer driver cards, and this is a card that the driver has to give to their client if they're going into a larger building, especially now with COVID. We can't go and sit in the waiting room with the client. It gives the driver's name and the phone number if they're running late. The client can give the card to the nurse if they're having some type of procedure and it's running late. And the drivers really appreciate that, having this vehicle, this item that they can use. It also, I should have taken the back side, also has telling about the organization and hoping that the healthcare provider that we're providing the ride to will assist us as well. So we have the driver info cards. Always use when I ask them to send back their insurance. Anytime I ask them to send me something, I always give them a self-addressed envelope. Training manuals, I provide them both online and hard copy so that they have things readily available. We started instituting donation envelopes with COVID, contact-free. And the drivers really prefer to have a donation envelope. Our volunteer drivers would prefer not to ask for that. So that's another thing that we incorporated. Next slide. Okay, so now we talked about how do we recognize these drivers? How do we do it as a nonprofit? I don't have a lot of money. I can buy them a $2 grocery bag, but what else can I do that's within the budget? People like to be recognized, and just about every politician, all the congressmen and women, have a budget to provide recognition of service, to have it. So this person on the right-hand side, Bob Andrews, has retired. He was retiring after 24 years as a NEAT driver. So we reached out to the U.S. Congresswoman Laurie Trahan, who covers that part of Massachusetts, and her representative came to our appreciation luncheon that we had in 2019, and he received the certificate. Recently, we had a celebration for the drivers who provided trips for people to get their vaccination. And once the word gets out that one politician is going to do something, then everybody else is. So we had a mayoral proclamation for the assistance from the city of Amesbury. We had the state representative, Jim Kalkors, give out certificates of recognition. And we also had the state senator. So many of the drivers commented that they were going to have to add a new room to their house for all their certificates. So that basically was a phone call to the politician, and then another phone call, letting them know the details and confirming that they were going to be there tomorrow. So that's a great way to do recognition. As I said earlier, working with the Chamber of Commerce and the Kiwanis and Rotary, they are also looking for members. The citizen, citizen of the year. There's all those types of awards, and working with those organizations allow you to recognize one of the volunteer drivers so that they can get some recognition for the tremendous caring volunteering that they do. Next slide. So we're almost done. And so again, how do I get all of this done very quickly with a minimal budget? So I do get 500 stickers for $6 on Amazon, and you did it, or volunteers are great. There's a whole bunch of different ones that you can get, and any type of correspondence that I send, I stick one of those stickers on as well. There was a time that we had access to a ton of shovels, so we did a lot of digging. We dig in and volunteer, but we also took some of those shovels and we dig our volunteers and essentially have the little tag and some candy, and that was a favor at one of our events. Recognizing their birthday. As I said, most people are 55 and older. It's nice to get a birthday card. I was able to purchase these birthday cards that had the card, the car on them, wishing you miles of happiness on your birthday. I didn't realize when I bought them that they were pre-cut for a gift card. And it would have been nice if I could have given them each a little gift of, a $10 or $15 gift card to the grocery store or gas station or something, but that wasn't in the budget. So I did order some of these "You Are Awesome" little cards that they can have as well. The other thing, and I don't have a slide for it, I thank you cards. So every year I do Thanksgiving cards. I don't want to have, I don't do the religious holidays. So the Thanksgiving card is a very good opportunity to thank people for their time. And how I do the thank you cards is I write a personal note in each Thanksgiving card. So I start November 1st and start writing them. But how do I remember the personal thing? How do I remember that Henry took that last minute ride to Boston on the Friday morning before Memorial Day? So I have a notebook and I write down throughout the year when one of our drivers does something a little unusual. Maybe I asked them to proofread one of our flyers for us, and they did that. They did a special ride, or maybe they gave a ride to someone who gave us a very nice donation. So I write these down throughout the year so that when Thanksgiving comes, I have something to, you know, really make it that personal thing. So because I don't have the ability to remember all that. One more tip on the birthday card. I do the birthday cards one time during the month, and then I put so if I do them the first of the month and somebody's birthday is the 25th, where you put the stamp is where I put the date I need to mail them. So I can, you know, I sit down once, do all the birthday cards, and then I just mail them based on the date that's where you put the stamp. Next slide. Again, you've seen these slides, but again, these are really good ways to say thank you to your volunteers. Tell them that you appreciate them, but at the same time, you're also helping them have an opportunity for them to come up and someone say to them, volunteer driving, what's that all about? And they can start talking. I find that our drivers are the most wonderful people in the world, but they don't want to brag, or they don't want to ask people to be a volunteer. But if somebody asks them about volunteering, they're more than happy to show you. Next slide. And as all of you who have experience with the volunteers, you know that the volunteers really love it. They say they get the most out of it. They get, you know, the people who have the ride are so grateful. During COVID, because we do want to engage our volunteers at all times, during COVID, we did Zoom meetings. We had volunteers, and we asked volunteers about what they liked about driving, and we recorded that, and that's on our website. So I encourage you to, you know, view those as well. Next slide. So we're at the end now. And so the success of recruiting, you know, over 24 volunteers every year is really about knowledge. And that I, again, thank this organization, NADTC, for all the many courses that they've offered in giving us this opportunity. I have several certificates, and it's all about educating people about the real need for transportation, not really what NEAT does, but how all of us, and I'm getting really close, you know, we could very well need help. There is a Managing and Organizing Senior Transportation Options certificate that's offered by UMass Boston online, and that's really good. In Massachusetts, we're very blessed. We have a Mass Mobility that's run by Rachel Fitchenbaum, who's outstanding, who also does similar things on the local level. Talk to your volunteer driving, other driving networks, share your experiences, network, you know, find organizations that have people that are also similar clients and network with them. And the last thing is was fortunate enough to get some scheduling software. And it's the scheduling software has been amazing as far as what it does. But the point here is really, I was spending a lot of time putting paper from one side of the room to the next side of the room. And I really need to be out recruiting now with, you know, COVID. That recruiting may be Zoom, recording, doing cable, all of that types of information. So it does say scheduling software, but it's really more about technology. What can you do? Can you know, have somebody that knows Excel do a formula for you so you can add up things faster or whatever in using that. So next slide. I thank you very much for your time and you're willing for me to put all this information together. And I think that's it.
Well, thank you, Virginia, for that wonderful information. You have some really great tips and strategies for recruiting volunteers and also retaining them. We are going to open up this session now for our group discussion. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone's lovely face here. Give me 1 second. So this session is meant to be interactive, so it would be great if everyone could turn on their camera. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, I totally understand. We want you to unmute yourself, ask questions to Virginia. You can ask questions to the group. You can share your experiences, or you can put questions in the chat as well. And so I know I have questions for Virginia, but does anyone have a question they would like to ask?
And Heather, just FYI, there are a couple of questions in the chat too.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the first question is, Virginia, what company did you use for the items for your recruitment, your t-shirts, your bag, your messaging bag? What company did you use?
Most of the things that we get are through Vista Print, and then Vista Print has a promotional marketing that's where I got the messenger bag. That was $35. But most of the stuff is Vista Print, and then the dollar store, the Valentines and things like that.
Also, next question. You work 30 hours a week, you said. How can you estimate how much time you're in the office or out of the office recruiting?
Prior to COVID, I really tried to be out of the office, probably about 75% of the time. It really is talking to people. And so that now, of course, with COVID, we're not doing that. We're not, I used to go to all the senior center events, the Halloween party, the Christmas party, and those things aren't happening. So I spent a lot more time inside, which is why we kind of went with the scheduling software, because I had that opportunity right now where I'm not out 3 days a week. So that helped with using the technology at this point.
Great. And next question, how do you track the driver's mileage? How do you track the driver's mileage before you started the assisted rides?
The honor system. So people would put in their, their mileage. We had paper-based vouchers, and they would fill them in, and they would, say 40 hours, and that's pretty much. We would just do the honor system. But interesting enough, we had paper-based, and then we got the scheduling software. So I wanted the scheduling software to go with our fiscal year, which is unusual, but it starts October 1st. So I put in the mileage from the paper-based, and 95% of them were right on the money. If anything, the drivers shortchanged them. The drivers would say it was 14, and the scheduling software would say it was 16. So they're very honest people. They're just amazing.
That's great. Did you find it successful recruiting at senior centers?
Yes, you do, because that's a very strong, what I find, very strong connection, because the senior centers are doing all the dispatching of the rides. What I did find, though, is it's more of the people who have, they're not what you would call a typical senior center. I worked at a senior center for 5 years. And it's more of people would say, well, I wanted help, and they would come into the senior center, or they would, you really wanted to get that 55 to 65 age group. So it's really the first time in the senior center. So it was more informational. So that's why the newsletter, a lot of the drivers that we have, they say they saw the ad in the senior center newsletter, and they usually are volunteering doing something else at the senior center, not so that's, it's very important to do that. But again, the Chamber of Commerce just in those organizations, they just provided people who really want, I mean, being a volunteer driver, you can make it what you want. I mean, if you want to drive 5 days a week, you can drive 5 days a week. But it's also, it's not a lot of training, where if you wanted to volunteer for another organization, you might have to learn certain programs or things like that. And, you know, other than right now, the scheduling software, I mean, most people know how to drive. So people do have that flexibility of, you know, and I always tell them, try it. There's no time commitment. And we do have drivers who drive 9 months out of the year and go to Florida. And then we have the other ones that drive during the winter, but go to Maine during the summer. So it's very flexible. So I try to make sure people realize that.
I will ask if anybody has any, mute yourself to ask any questions at this time.
Yes, I have a question.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi there. We came into a situation where we were paying the drivers from the client's home to their destination and back to their home. And some clients are saying, hey, some drivers are saying, hey, but it took me, 22 miles to get to their home. So that's 44 miles round trip. And I'd like to be paid for that. Were y'all paying for that, or as we were initially doing from the pickup and then back to the return on the reimbursement?
Great question, Amanda. So we do pay them from their house till they return.
Okay.
But some of your grant money, and it's really important that you understand that, and that's one of the things that I've learned through all of these office hours and other training sessions, is some of your funding is limited to only when the client is in there. So you have to keep track of that. And of course, the scheduling software does that for you, which is really nice, because you can just run a report to find out how many total miles and then how many miles the clients are there, so you can do it appropriately for your funding. So we do it for all, but you got to be careful, because some funding only does it for client-based.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
So while we're talking about mileage, you mentioned 45 cents per mile. Is that the federal mileage reimbursement?
No, that's that's what we've been doing. When we first started out 40 years ago, we were giving them like 25 cents a mile, and then it's just kind of gone up to the 45 cents a mile. I think actually the federal government, if you're an employee, I think it's like 55 cents now, but we do 45, and that works out well with everybody. And we do have people who don't, they don't want to be reimbursed, but we keep track of all those miles and everything.
Great. And do you coordinate with your local public transportation system?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things that I often do is I talk about transportation as in general. I write articles to the local magazines about transportation and how the public transportation, how that works. And I'm very familiar with the busing. And I actually got the bus to stop at the senior center when I was working there. It took me 5 years, but we did get the bus to finally stop at the senior center. But it's also very important that you understand your public transportation to recruit and educate everybody with the bus company. So it is 5 miles from my house to the grocery store, to the closest Stop and Shop, but it would take me 45 minutes to take the bus. And it's those stories that help people want to become a volunteer. It's those stories that say, maybe they could take a bus, but of course a lot of seniors can't take a bus because they, mobility issues or vision, but it's really not very convenient all the time either. And so I find that just talking about transportation really, is my main focus. And then, oh, by the way, I have a volunteer driving program, and oh, by the way, we need volunteers. Because the transportation affects everybody, me, you, the local community, businesses. Yes, I often do events. Before COVID, we would have a transportation event. We would have the bus company come and talk about the bus and show people how to use the app that you can use to tell if the bus is coming. I mean, it's all about transportation. I tell everybody to sign up for the if they can, for the ADA buses that are locally, because we can't, you know, we can't do every ride. I mean, we have a lot of volunteers, but for some reason they're always on Thursday or something. I mean, you know, it's like, why can't we have 2 rides every day a week? But no, we have like 10, so you can't always do that.
Exactly. And so I know you collect a lot of data. Can you talk about the importance of collecting data and what everyone should be tracking?
Absolutely. So we keep track of how many rides, how many individuals we help, unduplicated individuals, so that, you know, it's a difference between giving 50 rides to 50 people or 50 rides to 5 people. We now, because of the software, we do have the ability to actually figure out exactly where we are going. Previously, a lot of the drivers filled out vouchers, and I would get a voucher that says, took Mary to the dentist in Ipswich. So it was very hard to figure out, you know, which dentist. And I suppose I could call the volunteer driver and ask them to be more specific, but I want the driver to drive. And if they didn't want to be specific, I wasn't going to tell them that they had to. Penmanship was an issue. You know, is that an M or an A or a B? So it was challenging to get good data. Now with the software, it has, you know, if it goes in good, it comes out good. So it is really important. And now I have a lot more statistics about where we're going, so I can go to those organizations and ask them for support, because I can say we've been here 10 times where I didn't. And so it's the information that you learn. So we do keep track of the rides, the hours. The volunteer hours are very important because you can use that volunteer hours when you're writing grants, how much time. So it's, you know, again, because one ride could be 1 hour, or one ride could be 5 hours. So it's very important to say, you know, here we provided 3,000 rides, but we provided, I can see it over there, 3,734 volunteer hours. And if you calculate a volunteer driver to be paid $10, $12, $15 an hour, that can be used when you're talking about your part of the contribution. What is your organization bringing to that grant application? Because I've only been writing grants for the last 4.5 years. And that was the thing. It was like, what do you mean? I need something. I have to write a grant, but I have to tell them that somebody else thinks it's a good idea too. So it's always like, how do you get the first person to say yes so the rest of the people go on? But anyway, so volunteer hours are real important to keep track of that. So we keep track of the mileage, the hours, the trips, and how many new people that we help. I keep track of the mileage for the drivers who are the top 10 drivers. I keep track of, you know, is it long rides? I keep track of the people that go to Boston, because those people need to be recognized, you know, driving to Boston. So anything that I can recognize and acknowledge in those thank you notes. But as far as the grants, the community transit grant, they want to know how many rides, how many people, what are your costs, so what does it cost for your average ride? So all that information is important.
So that's great information for people, you know, just starting to write grants. Thank you, Virginia. And we have Michelle's hand raised. Michelle, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, thank you very much, Jenny. Great information. We are just now starting our volunteer driving program through Catholic Social Services in Ohio. And so a lot of great information. But one question we've talked about, because we do not have a lot of volunteers right now, do you limit the number of rides that your individuals can request each month, or is it just open to how many drivers you have available?
It's just open to how many drivers we have available. We have on our literature that, it's a volunteer driving program. We can't guarantee a ride. So we just, if you call and we can get a ride for you, that's good. We don't limit them. In the years that we've done it, there's usually always one person that for some reason has an awful lot of rides, and you sit there and you kind of wonder, gee, this person's getting a ride 3 times a week and these other people aren't. And so that ends up being something that you need to look at on an individual basis. Talk to the client, what's going on. As somebody already mentioned, it's real important to make sure you understand what public transportation options are, because, often, in my experience here, and we just got a new director for the public transportation system here for the Merrimack Valley Regional Transit Authority. So I know wonderful things will be happening. But we often we can suggest splitting a ride, so that it seems to me that in our area, they pick them up on time, but there's a lot of anxiety with the seniors to be, when the appointment's over, is the driver going to be there at 3 o'clock? And with the public transportation system right now, they can't actually always be there at 3 o'clock because they're picking up 4 people. But with an individual volunteer driving, you only have that one person. So that's another option to say, well, okay, well, you're going to have to take public transportation to your appointment 1 day a week, and we'll have a volunteer pick you up. So you do have to be, you do have to think about it, but you really have to wait till the problem comes before it becomes a real issue.
Thank you, Virginia. So we're close to 3 o'clock, but I want to get Karen's question. She had her hand raised.
Hi, I live in a rural part of Minnesota, and we have an issue with drivers having to drive long distances. And when you do that, there's the 1099 issue that comes into play once a volunteer makes $500, I think it is, or is it $6? I'm not positive. And they've got to file the 1099. And I'm wondering, when you do your recruitment efforts, do you mention that at all, as to the fact that that may be something that will arise?
Well, we don't pay them. So if we're not paying them, we don't have to do a 1099. We provide them with reimbursement. We don't pay them. So we don't provide 1099s and haven't done it for 40 years.
Interesting.
And we do have long rides, but it's not income. They're not getting income when they're getting mileage reimbursement. When you get mileage as an employee, and you get mileage reimbursement because you went on you drove to a seminar or something. I mean, that's not part of your income. That's not in your paycheck. But to best of my knowledge, we've been doing it this way for 40 years. So I guess that might be something that the national organization can help us with to verify that, because I mean, we provide the supplemental liability insurance, and the only way we can provide the volunteer supplemental liability insurance is that they're not getting paid, and so they can't take tips. And we go over that with the volunteers all the time, that if somebody wants to give you a tip, you cannot accept it. If you want to take it and donate it to NEAT, that's fine. But if you accept payment, a tip, then you're being compensated, and therefore your liability insurance, and I will knock on wood because we've had the liability insurance for 40 years and have not had one accident. So for anybody there that's starting a new organization and somebody says, what about the liability? You'll find that volunteer drivers have very few accidents nationwide.
Well, it is 3:02, and I would love to get to everyone's questions. But if you do have questions, you can put them in the chat, and then I can follow up with Virginia, and we can respond to those questions. I want to thank you, Jenny, for your wonderful presentation, your wonderful tips for recruiting and retainment. And we're going to end this here. Carrie put an evaluation in the chat, but we'll also send the evaluation out along with a copy of the slides and also a recording. And again, Jenny, I'd like to thank you for your wonderful presentation and your time with us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.